The woman nursing whiskey at the far end of the Anchor and Anchor didn't look like anyone special. 5'7" in worn jeans and a gray jacket that concealed the lean muscle underneath. Dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, threaded with premature silver that caught the neon light filtering through cigarette smoke and salt air. Her green eyes tracked the room with the mechanical precision of someone who'd spent too many nights in places where exits mattered more than conversation. She hadn't touched the whiskey in 20 minutes. The Anchor and Anchor sat 3 blocks from Camp Pendleton's main gate, a weathered dive bar where junior Marines and sailors went to blow off steam after long weeks of training cycles and pre-deployment workups. The neon sign outside flickered red and blue against the coastal fog, casting shadows across cracked leather booths and a floor that had absorbed decades of spilled beer and broken dreams. The jukebox in the corner played something country and forgettable. Pool balls cracked like small arms fire. Marines crowded around tables, their voices rising with each round of drinks, talking about deployments and women and all the things young men talk about when they're trying to prove they're not afraid. The woman sat alone. That's exactly how she wanted it. Commander Kira Ashford had driven 50 miles from Naval Base Coronado just to find a place where nobody knew her face, her name, or the weight of the legacy she carried like shrapnel embedded too deep to remove. She was 35 years old, and she'd survived 47 firefights in Helmand Province, Syria, and Iraq. She'd earned a Bronze Star with Valor for holding a position alone for 40 minutes, while her team extracted a downed pilot. She coordinated training and readiness for multiple SEAL teams across the West Coast as the Group Operations Officer for Naval Special Warfare Group 1. The operators called her Reaper for her precision, for the 23 confirmed kills she'd stacked up in a single engagement when the Taliban thought they could overrun a SEAL position. But tonight, sitting in a dive bar on a Friday evening, she was just a woman trying to disappear. The bartender Wade Brennan recognized what she was the moment she walked through the door. Not her face, not her name, but the way she moved. Economy of motion. Eyes that swept corners and cataloged threats before she'd taken 3 steps inside. Hands that stayed near her waistline even when she was reaching for a glass. Wade had been a Navy corpsman attached to Marine infantry in Fallujah back in 2004 before an IED took most of the hearing in his left ear and sent him home with a Purple Heart and nightmares that lasted longer than the war. He knew an operator when he saw one. He also knew when someone wanted to be left alone. So he'd filled her glass once, topped off her water twice, and hadn't asked a single question. Just the way she liked it, Corporal Garrett Hollis stumbled through the door at 8 o'clock with 3 of his buddies from 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. He was 24 years old, 6'2", 220 pounds of ego, wrapped in a fresh, high and tight haircut and a USMC tattoo that stretched across his left shoulder. He'd deployed once to Okinawa, where he'd spent 7 months on base pulling guard duty and talking about combat like he'd seen it. He'd spent the evening at another bar down the street drinking whiskey and telling anyone who'd listen about how soft the Navy was, how SEALs were overrated, and how women had no business in combat roles. His buddies egged him on. They always did. When Hollis saw Kira sitting alone at the bar, he saw an opportunity. A woman by herself on a Friday night, probably some dependent wife waiting for her husband to finish duty. Easy target for a laugh and a story he could tell back in the barracks. He walked over and leaned against the bar next to her and told her she looked lost. Kira didn't respond. She took a slow sip of water and kept her eyes forward. Hollis tried again, told her she looked tense, that maybe she needed someone to help her loosen up. His buddies Lance Corporal Hayes and PFC Donovan moved closer, forming a loose half circle around her. They weren't threatening yet, just present, creating pressure the way young men do when they're drunk and stupid and haven't learned the difference between confidence and arrogance. Kira set her glass down slowly. She turned to face Hollis and asked him once in a calm voice that carried no emotion to remove his hand from her shoulder. Hollis laughed, told her she had an attitude problem, that women who came to Marine bars shouldn't complain when they got attention. He leaned in closer, his face inches from hers, and his breath reeked of whiskey and poor decisions. Then he said the words that would change everything. Women like you get good men killed out here, too worried about making quota to care about combat effectiveness. The bar went quiet, not all at once, but in waves like a shock wave rolling outward from an explosion. Marines at the pool table stopped mid-shot. The group near the jukebox turned to watch. Even the country music seemed to fade into background static. Wade Brennan reached for the phone behind the bar, ready to call base security. Kira stood up slowly. She was 3 inches shorter than Hollis and outweighed by 80 pounds, but the way she moved made him hesitate for just a fraction of a second. She didn't step back, didn't flinch, didn't show fear or anger or any of the reactions he expected. She looked him in the eyes and told him he had 5 seconds to apologize and walk away. Hollis's pride wouldn't allow it. Not in front of his friends, not in front of the whole bar, not when he'd spent the last 3 hours talking about how women didn't belong in combat. He shoved her backward, not hard enough to knock her down, just enough to make a point, enough to reassert dominance, enough to put her in her place. Kira's back hit the bar rail. What happened next took 3 seconds. Her training took over before her conscious mind registered the threat. Years of muscle memory built through thousands of hours of close-quarters combat drills and hand-to-hand training compressed into pure reaction. She caught Hollis's wrist mid-shove with her left hand, her fingers wrapping around the bones with precise pressure. Her right hand came up and controlled his elbow. She rotated her body 90 degrees using his forward momentum against him and swept his legs with a movement so economical it barely looked like effort. Hollis went down face first. The sound of his body hitting the floor was like a sack of wet sand. 3 seconds after he'd shoved her, Kira had him pinned. Her knee pressed into his upper back between his shoulder blades. His right arm locked behind him in a position that would dislocate his shoulder if he struggled. Her weight distributed perfectly to control him without causing injury. She could feel his pulse hammering through his wrist, could hear his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She held him there for 10 seconds. Long enough for the lesson to sink in. Long enough for his buddies to realize they'd made a catastrophic mistake. The bar erupted. Hayes and Donovan moved forward, but Wade came around the bar with a baseball bat and told them to stand the hell down. Two Navy petty officers who'd been sitting in the corner stood up, recognizing the situation for exactly what it was. Wade announced that base security had been called. Kira held Hollis down for another 10 seconds, then released him and stepped back. Clinical, controlled, no wasted motion. Hollis scrambled to his feet, his face red with humiliation and rage. He called her a string of slurred insults, words designed to wound, to diminish, to reduce her to nothing more than her gender. Every syllable dripped with the kind of venom that comes from ego shattered against reality. Kira didn't respond. She reached into her jacket pocket with deliberate calm and pulled out her military ID card. She held it up so Hollis could read it. The plastic card caught the neon light. Commander, 05, Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Then she spoke for the second time that evening, her voice carrying across the silent bar with the weight of absolute authority. Your command will be contacted by Naval Criminal Investigative Service regarding assault on a superior officer. What happens next will be determined by your chain of command and the severity of the charges they choose to pursue. Hollis's face went white. The color drained from his cheeks like someone had opened a valve. His buddies stepped back suddenly, understanding the magnitude of what had just happened. A Marine in the back of the bar, older than the others, wearing the weathered look of someone who'd actually seen combat, made a sound like he'd been punched in the gut. Holy shit, he said loud enough to carry. That's Ashford. That's Admiral Ashford's daughter. He paused and his voice dropped to something like reverence. That's the Reaper. The words hung in the air like smoke. Base security arrived 4 minutes later. Two military police officers in pressed uniforms and expressions that said they'd seen this movie before. They took statements from Wade, from the petty officers who'd witnessed the assault, and from Kira herself. Her statement was professional, clinical. She recounted the facts without emotion or embellishment. Time, location, witnesses, physical contact, verbal threats, the takedown. Everything documented with the precision of someone who'd written after-action reports from actual combat. Hollis and his friends were escorted back to Camp Pendleton under watch. They didn't say a word, just walked out into the night with the weight of their futures pressing down on them like gravestones. Kira stayed at the bar for another 20 minutes after they left. She finished her water in silence while Wade cleaned up. The other patrons gave her space, but their eyes tracked her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. The older Marine who'd identified her nodded once from across the room, a gesture of recognition between warriors. Before she left, Wade told her he'd served with operators in Iraq, attached to a SEAL platoon during the push into Fallujah. He said he recognized control when he saw it. Real control. The kind that came from someone who knew exactly how much force to apply and when to stop. He thanked her for not breaking the kid's arm. Kira nodded once and walked out into the night. Kira sat in her car in the parking lot for 30 minutes before she trusted herself to drive. Her hands were steady on the steering wheel, but her jaw ached from clenching. She'd handled the situation exactly as she'd been trained. Controlled force, minimal injury, proper documentation, everything by the book. But the words Hollis had used still echoed in her head. Women like you get good men killed. She'd heard variations of that line her entire career. From instructors during buds who'd pushed her harder than anyone else to see if she'd break. From teammates who questioned every decision she made until she proved herself in combat. From senior officers who smiled to her face and told promotion boards she wasn't ready for leadership. And from her father, Admiral James Ashford, who'd never said it directly, but had implied it in every conversation they'd had about integration policy and combat effectiveness. Her father, the man who'd built modern naval special warfare doctrine, the man whose name opened doors and closed opportunities in equal measure, the man who'd believed his entire career that women had no place in special operations, the man she hadn't spoken to in 6 months. Kira pulled out her phone and scrolled to his contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She hadn't spoken to him since his retirement ceremony 4 months ago, a formal affair at the Naval Amphibious Base where she'd stood in dress blues and clapped along with everyone else while her father received honors for a career built on principles that excluded her. She didn't call. Instead, she opened her email and scrolled through the endless stream of operational updates, personnel reports, and classified briefings that defined her life. She was responsible for coordinating the operational readiness of hundreds of operators across multiple SEAL teams. She made decisions daily that affected combat readiness, mission success, and lives. She'd earned every rank, every billet, every ounce of respect through blood and competence. But tonight in a dive bar 3 blocks from base, a drunk corporal had reduced her to nothing more than a woman who didn't belong. Kira closed her email and stared at the photograph she kept on her phone's lock screen. A picture of her father in his dress whites from 30 years ago, standing on the deck of a ship and with a young Kira on his shoulders. Her tiny hands gripped his uniform cover. She'd been 4 years old. She thought her father was invincible. She wondered if he'd ever thought the same about her. She started the car and drove back toward Coronado. She had work in the morning. She had operators who depended on her coordination. She had a corporal whose chain of command would be dealing with NCIS notifications by Monday. And she had a father she still couldn't face. Kira Ashford grew up in a house overlooking Chesapeake Bay, where the water stretched out like hammered steel under winter skies, and the salt air carried the weight of generations of naval tradition. The house had belonged to her grandfather, a destroyer captain in World War II who'd fought at Leyte Gulf. The walls held photographs of men in uniform stretching back 100 years. Officers and enlisted, pilots and submariners. And in the corner of her father's study, a shadow box containing a trident and medals from operations nobody was allowed to discuss. Her father, Admiral James Ashford, had been a SEAL during the Cold War. He'd earned his trident in the early 1980s and deployed to places that didn't appear on maps. Grenada, Panama, operations in Central America that remained classified decades later. He'd risen through the ranks on the strength of his tactical mind and his ability to turn special operations theory into doctrine that actually worked. By the time Kira was born in 1990, her father was already a captain, already shaping the future of naval special warfare. He was also a man who believed women had no place in combat. Kira heard it her entire childhood. At dinner tables, surrounded by officers and operators, her father would hold court, explaining in patient, reasonable tones why integrating women into special operations was a mistake. Not because women weren't capable, he'd say. Not because they lacked courage or intelligence, but because the teams required a level of physical performance and unit cohesion that mixed-gender units couldn't sustain under the stress of actual combat. It wasn't personal, he'd explain. It was practical. It was about maintaining standards. It was about ensuring that when Americans needed the best warriors the nation could produce, those warriors weren't hamstrung by social engineering. Kira's mother, Elizabeth, would listen quietly from the other end of the table. She'd been a naval intelligence officer before Kira was born, smart enough to make commander before she resigned her commission to raise a daughter. She never argued with her husband in front of guests, but sometimes Kira would catch her mother watching her with an expression that said things would be different someday. Elizabeth died of cancer when Kira was 8 years old. The funeral was full-dress uniforms and a flag-draped coffin and a 21-gun salute that made Kira's ears ring for hours afterward. Her father didn't cry. He stood at attention with his jaw locked and his eyes forward, the same way he stood during promotion ceremonies and change of command events. After the funeral, he threw himself into work. He deployed more, worked longer hours at the Pentagon, rose to Rear Admiral and then to Vice Admiral, built the doctrine that would guide naval special warfare into the 21st century. And Kira grew up in that house by the bay, watching her father become a legend, while she learned that some things, no matter how much you wanted them, were simply not possible for people like her. She stopped arguing with him when she was 16, not because she agreed, because she realized that words wouldn't change his mind. Only actions would. On her 18th birthday in 2008, Kira walked into a Navy recruiting office and enlisted as an intelligence specialist. She didn't tell her father until after she'd signed the papers and taken the oath. He'd looked at her across his study, the shadow box with his trident on the wall behind him, and asked her why. "Because someone has to prove you wrong," she'd said. He didn't respond, just nodded once and went back to his work. Kira served 4 years, enlisted, made second-class petty officer, and earned a reputation as one of the sharpest intelligence analysts in her unit. She worked 18-hour days, studied tactics and doctrine in her off hours, and applied for a commission through the Seaman to Admiral program. She was accepted, earned her degree, commissioned as an ensign at 22. And then in January 2013, everything changed. The Department of Defense rescinded the combat exclusion policy. Women could now serve in combat roles: infantry, armor, artillery, and special operations. Kira didn't tell her father she was volunteering for BUDS until after she'd passed the physical screening test. She ran the 1.5 miles in under 10 minutes, did 70 push-ups, 90 sit-ups, and 15 pull-ups, swam 500 yards in under 9 minutes. She called him from Coronado to tell him she'd been accepted to basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. He didn't speak to her for 6 months. BUDS broke Kira twice before she earned the trident. She entered training in 2014 at 24 years old, assigned to Class 340. 280 candidates started Hell Week, 43 finished. Kira was one of them, but not on her first attempt. The instructors pushed her harder than anyone else in the class, not out of malice, out of necessity, because she was the first woman in her class, and if she failed, it would be used as evidence that the policy was wrong. If she succeeded, it would be scrutinized for any hint that standards had been lowered, so they gave her no quarter. During Hell Week, she spent 6 days with almost no sleep, running miles in wet boots, carrying logs that weighed more than she did swimming in ocean water cold enough to stop her heart. The instructors screamed in her face, told her to quit, told her she was making her teammates suffer because of her ego, told her that every minute she stayed was a minute wasted that could be used on candidates who actually belonged. She didn't quit. During surf torture, lying in the Pacific with waves breaking over her head and her body temperature dropping toward hypothermia, she repeated a mantra in her head. Words from Gunnery Sergeant William Draven, a retired SEAL who'd served with her father during the Cold War. Bull Draven had become a surrogate uncle after her mother died, the one adult who'd encouraged her dreams, instead of explaining why they were impossible. "Pain is weather," Bull had told her before she shipped to Coronado. "It passes. Quitting is permanent. Remember that when it gets hard." She remembered. She made it through Hell Week on her first attempt, but the dive phase broke her. During a night ocean swim in water temperatures hovering just above 50 degrees, Kira's body shut down. Hypothermia set in fast and brutal. Her core temperature dropped to 93.8 degrees. She couldn't remember her name, couldn't remember where she was. Her swim buddy pulled her to shore and called for medical. They rushed her to the Naval Hospital, wrapped her in warming blankets, pumped heated IV fluids into her veins. It took 4 days for her core temperature to stabilize. The medical board rolled her back 8 weeks. She'd have to start dive phase over with the next class. She did. The second time through dive phase, she separated her shoulder during a surf passage exercise. The wave slammed her into the sand with enough force to tear ligaments. Surgery, 6 months of physical therapy, another medical rollback. By the time she finally graduated Buds in 2016, she'd spent 18 months in training. She was 26 years old. She'd been rolled back twice. She'd nearly died from hypothermia. She'd torn her body apart and rebuilt it through sheer refusal to quit. On graduation day, the commanding officer pinned the trident on her uniform, the small gold pin that meant everything, the symbol that said she'd earned her place among America's elite warriors. Her father didn't attend the ceremony. He sent a letter instead. 2 sentences. Congratulations on completing the training. Earning the trident is only the beginning. Kira stood in her dress whites, surrounded by her graduating class, holding that letter and trying not to cry. But Gunnery Sergeant Bull Draven was there. He'd driven across the country from Virginia to attend. 70 years old with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much combat, wearing a suit instead of a uniform, but still carrying himself like the warrior he'd been. After the ceremony, he pulled Kira aside and handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a compass, old brass, weathered and dented with scratches across the face, the kind of compass that had seen real use in real operations. Grenada 1983, Bull said. Your dad and I jumped into Point Salines with SEAL Team 4, medical school invasion. That compass kept us alive when everything went to hell and Cuban forces tried to push us into the sea. Kira held the compass like it was made of glass. Your father wanted to give this to you himself, Bull continued. But he can't, not yet. Because if he does, it means admitting he was wrong about you, about women in the teams, about everything he's built his career on. So why are you giving it to me? Because someone needs to. Bull's voice was gravel and smoke. And because you earned it, you know what your call sign should be? Kira shook her head. Reaper. Because you're going to be death to America's enemies. And because when you're done, you'll have changed everything your old man thought he knew about who belongs in this fight. Bull pulled her into a hug, whispered in her ear so only she could hear. Your dad's proud of you. He's just too scared to say it. Keep proving him wrong, kid. I'll make sure he's watching. Kira deployed to Helmand Province, Afghanistan in 2018. She was 28 years old, assigned to a West Coast SEAL team as a junior officer leading a fire team. They ran direct action raids against Taliban commanders, cleared compounds, gathered intelligence, did the violent, necessary work that kept American forces alive and pushed insurgents back into the mountains. She was good at it, better than good. The operators in her team learned fast that gender didn't matter when bullets started flying. What mattered was whether you could shoot straight, think clearly under stress, and make decisions that kept your teammates alive. Kira could do all three. They started calling her Reaper after the third operation, a night raid on a Taliban weapons cache that turned into a running gunfight through a village. Kira's precision with her M4 carbine was surgical. She put rounds exactly where they needed to go when they needed to go there, and nothing wasted. The call sign stuck. The operation that earned her the Bronze Star with Valor happened 6 months into her deployment. Intelligence indicated a downed F-18 pilot, Captain Jennifer Blake, was being held in a Taliban compound 15 miles outside of Lashkar Gah. The compound was hardened, 40-plus enemy fighters, high walls, defensive positions. But the pilot was alive and the mission was clear: get her out. The 8-operator SEAL element inserted via MH-60M helicopter at 0230 hours. No moon. No light except for the green glow of night vision. Kira led the point element, moving through the darkness with her weapon up and her breathing controlled. They breached the compound with explosive charges. The night lit up with fire and sound. Kira moved through the breach like she'd done it 1,000 times, her team flowing behind her in practice coordination. Room clearing, 4 hostiles down in the first 90 seconds. Controlled chaos. They found Captain Blake in a basement room, injured but alive. She had a broken arm and cuts across her face, but her eyes were clear and focused. About damn time, Blake said. Then the compound erupted. Taliban fighters poured in from surrounding buildings. RPG fire. Sustained AK-47 contact from multiple positions. The team leader made the call, exfil the pilot, while Kira held the eastern approach. Alone. Kira took position behind a low wall with her M4A1 SOP Modi and 210 rounds of ammunition. The eastern approach was a kill zone, 50 meters of open ground between the compound and the nearest buildings. Anyone coming through that space was coming for the team. She'd make sure they didn't make it. For 40 minutes, Kira Ashford held that position by herself. She calculated range and windage for every shot. The desert wind was running 8 miles per hour left to right. She adjusted her holds, fired in controlled pairs, never wasted ammunition, never panicked. Taliban fighters tried to flank her from the left. She repositioned, held them. They tried to suppress her with volume of fire, hundreds of rounds chewing up the wall she was hiding behind. She waited until they reloaded, then engaged with precision that turned their aggression into casualties. An RPG screamed past her position and detonated 15 meters away. The blast wave hammered her against the wall. Shrapnel from the explosion caught her left forearm, shredding her sleeve and opening a gash that ran from wrist to elbow. She kept fighting. Blood soaked her sleeve and dripped onto the dirt. Her arm burned, but her grip stayed solid and her trigger control stayed smooth. In her head, she could hear Bull Draven's voice from all those years ago. Pain is weather. It passes. The mission is permanent. Complete the mission. She completed the mission. 23 confirmed enemy kills, 40 minutes alone. Her team extracted Captain Blake without a single additional American casualty. When the team finally cleared the area and called for exfil, Kira stood up from her position. Her legs were shaking. Her arm was a mess of blood and torn fabric. But she walked to the landing zone under her own power. The team medic HM2, Caleb Hollis, treated her wound in the back of the helicopter while they flew back to base. He wrapped the gash with quick, efficient movements, his hands steady despite the helicopter's vibration. "Commander," he shouted over the rotor noise, "that was the most impressive display of controlled violence I've ever witnessed." Kira just nodded, too exhausted to respond. They awarded her the Bronze Star with Valor 3 months later. The citation read, "For exceptionally valorous actions while engaged in combat operations against enemy forces, Commander Ashford's tactical proficiency, courage under fire, and unwavering commitment to mission success directly resulted in the safe extraction of a downed pilot and saved the lives of 9 American service members," her father called after the ceremony. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. "You showed courage in Afghanistan," he said, "but one successful deployment doesn't change the larger strategic questions about women in special operations: unit cohesion, physical standards, long-term sustainability. These remain open questions." Kira stood in her quarters at Coronado, staring at the Bronze Star in her hand, and tried to find words. She couldn't. "Congratulations on the medal," her father said. Then he hung up. Kira sat down on her rack and cried for the first time since her mother's funeral. Kira was promoted to commander at 33 years old in 2023. The promotion was below zone twice, meaning she was selected ahead of her peers based on exceptional performance. It was the kind of fast-track promotion that usually indicated someone was being groomed for senior leadership. She was assigned as the Group Operations Officer for Naval Special Warfare Group 1 at Coronado. The position gave her authority over training cycles, operational readiness, and resource coordination for multiple SEAL teams across the West Coast. She had influence that reached into more teams than most operators would serve with in their entire careers. She had earned respect from most of her peers. The operators who'd deployed with her knew she was the real deal. They'd seen her work, seen her make hard decisions under fire, seen her carry her weight and then some. But every decision she made was scrutinized. Every success was attributed to her father's influence to the network of officers who wanted to see integration succeed regardless of merit. Every failure was proof that women didn't belong, that standards had been lowered, that the social experiment was endangering the teams. She worked 18-hour days, reviewed training reports, coordinated deployment schedules, made decisions about which teams got which resources and which operations. She did her job with the same precision she'd applied to everything else in her career. And she tried not to think about the fact that her father, the man whose shadow she'd spent her entire life trying to escape, had suffered a stroke 6 months ago. Vice Admiral James Ashford, retired, was 66 years old when the stroke hit him during a morning run near his home in Virginia. He survived, but the damage was enough to end any hope of continuing his work. He retired quietly, moving full-time to the family house overlooking Chesapeake Bay. Kira hadn't visited once. Bull Draven called her every few weeks, checking in, asking how she was doing. And every few weeks, he'd mention that her father asked about her, that he was proud of her, that he wanted to talk. Not yet, Kira would say. Not until I know I've earned this completely separate from his name. Bull would sigh. Kid, you've proved everything you needed to prove. The only person who doesn't see it is you. Then I'll keep proving it until I do see it. On this Friday night in 2025, Kira had driven 50 miles to a dive bar because it was the anniversary of the helmet operation. 7 years ago tonight, she'd held a position alone for 40 minutes and earned the medal that still sat in a drawer in her quarters because she couldn't bring herself to display it. There was a memorial ceremony at Coronado tonight, a gathering of operators who'd served in that deployment. They'd wanted her to speak, to share the story, to inspire the next generation. She'd declined. Instead, she'd driven to this bar where nobody knew her, where she could be anonymous for a few hours, where the weight of legacy and expectation and constant scrutiny could be set down even temporarily. She'd come here to disappear. Corporal Garrett Hollis had made sure everyone would remember, and now driving back to Coronado in the dark with the Pacific Ocean stretching out to her right, Kira realized something had shifted. The anger she'd felt in the bar had cooled into something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but calculation. She'd spent her entire career proving she belonged, proving the standards hadn't been lowered, proving that women could perform at the same level as men in the most demanding military role America had to offer. But maybe proof wasn't enough anymore. Maybe it was time to build something instead of just demonstrating competence. Her phone buzzed with a notification, an email from the NCIS field office. The report had been filed. Corporal Hollis's command would be notified Monday morning. They'd want her statement. They'd want to know what punishment she recommended. Court-martial was justified. Assault on a superior officer. Multiple witnesses. Video footage from the bar's security system. They could end his career, discharge him, put it on his permanent record that he'd attacked a female officer, and learn the hard way that rank and competence mattered more than ego. But as Kira drove through the night, she thought about Bull Draven's compass sitting in her quarters. The compass that had kept her father and his mentor alive during Grenada. The compass that represented legacy and mentorship in the passing of knowledge from one generation to the next. She thought about HM2 Caleb Hollis, the Navy corpsman who treated her shrapnel wound in the back of a helicopter 7 years ago, who told her that what she'd done was the most impressive display of controlled vigilance he'd ever seen. And she wondered if Corporal Garrett Hollis might be related. By the time she pulled into the parking lot at Coronado, she'd made a decision. She'd prove her father wrong one more time, not by destroying someone who'd wronged her, but by building something better. On Monday morning, she'd make a phone call that would change everything. Monday morning arrived with fog rolling in from the Pacific, thick enough to blur the edges of buildings at Camp Pendleton. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez stood in his office on the third floor of the battalion headquarters, reading the NCIS report for the third time. Each reading made it worse. Assault on a superior officer. Commander. 05. Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Multiple witnesses. Video footage. The phrase "shoved victim backward against bar" appeared in 3 separate statements. The victim's name was typed in clean bureaucratic font, Commander Kira Ashford. Martinez was 52 years old and had commanded infantry battalions in Iraq and Afghanistan. He'd seen Marines do stupid things before, but assaulting a SEAL commander in a bar 3 blocks from base reached a special level of catastrophic decision-making that almost impressed him with its completeness. He buzzed his adjutant. "Get me Commander Ashford at Ninisash Group 1, and get Hollis's chain of command in here. Captain Riggs Gunny Thompson." 30 minutes. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and carried the quiet authority of someone who'd made life-and-death decisions in actual combat. "Commander Ashford speaking. Commander, this is Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. I'm calling regarding the incident Friday night involving one of my Marines, Corporal Garrett Hollis." "Yes, Colonel. I received notification from NCIS that the report was filed." Martinez expected her to demand maximum punishment, expected her to push for court-martial, for the full weight of military justice to come down on a corporal who'd been stupid enough to assault her. That's what he would have done in her position. Instead, she asked him a question. "Colonel, what outcome do you believe serves both justice and the Marine Corps?" Martinez paused. In 28 years of service, nobody had ever asked him that question in quite that way. Usually people told him what they wanted, what they demanded, what punishment would satisfy them. That's not the question I expected, Commander. I know, but it's the one I'm asking. Corporal Hollis made a terrible mistake. He assaulted a superior officer. Under the UCMJ, we could destroy his career, court-martial him, discharge him, make an example that echoes through every barracks from here to Okinawa. That's exactly what I expected you to recommend. Or, Kira continued, her voice steady, we could ask whether punishment alone serves the institution or whether rehabilitation might serve it better. Corporal Hollis is 24 years old. He's been in the Marines 4 years. According to his service record, which I reviewed this weekend, he has no prior disciplinary issues. He made a catastrophically stupid decision while intoxicated. The question is whether we write him off as irredeemable or whether we invest in making him better. Martinez sat down. This was not the conversation he'd anticipated. What are you proposing, Commander? Article 15, non-judicial punishment, reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, extra duty and restriction, standard NJP consequences that make clear his actions were unacceptable. She paused. Plus a 14-day intensive training program that I'll design personally. I want to rehabilitate him, Colonel. I want to teach him why he was wrong. And I want to send him back to your battalion as a better Marine than the one who assaulted me. Martinez stared at the NCIS report on his desk. Why say? Because I checked your personnel rosters, Colonel. Corporal Hollis has a brother, HM2 Caleb Hollis, Navy corpsman. He deployed with my team in Helmand Province in 2018. He saved American lives. He saved my life specifically when I took shrapnel during an operation. Kira's voice remained calm, but something underneath it suggested this was an abstract policy. Teaching Garrett Hollis isn't about him. It's about honoring his brother's service by making sure Garrett becomes the Marine that Caleb deserves to have as family. Martinez wrote notes on a legal pad. His handwriting was terrible, but the words were clear enough. Rehabilitation, training, second chance. I'll need to coordinate with my command, he said. But if they approve, you'll have full cooperation, Commander. And for what it's worth, this is the most professional response to assault I've ever witnessed. It's not professional, Colonel. It's tactical. Culture doesn't change through punishment alone. It changes through education. One person at a time. Corporal Hollis is going to be the first. After she hung up, Martinez sat in his office for 5 minutes processing the conversation. Then he called his operations officer and told him to clear 2 weeks on the training calendar. They had work to do. At 0800 hours, Corporal Garrett Hollis stood at attention in Lieutenant Colonel Martinez's office. His dress uniform was immaculate. His hands were locked at his sides. His eyes were fixed on a point on the wall behind Martinez's desk. Captain Riggs stood to Martinez's left. Gunnery Sergeant Thompson stood to his right. Both men had expressions that suggested Hollis's immediate future involved significant pain. Martinez read the NCIS report aloud. Every word, every detail, the timeline, the witnesses, the video footage. The phrase assault on superior officer repeated like a drumbeat. When Martinez finished reading, the silence in the office was absolute. Corporal Hollis, Martinez said, his voice carrying the weight of 28 years of command authority, you are charged with assault conduct unbecoming in bringing discredit upon the Marine Corps. Under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, these charges could result in court-martial. If convicted, you could face dishonorable discharge, confinement, and forfeiture of all pay and allowances. Your career would be over. Your future would be destroyed. Do you understand the severity of your situation? Yes, sir, Hollis's voice barely qualified as a whisper. I don't think you do. The woman you assaulted is Commander Kira Ashford, Naval Special Warfare Group 1, Group Operations Officer coordinating multiple SEAL teams, Bronze Star with Valor for actions in Afghanistan, where she held a position alone for 40 minutes and saved 9 American lives. The operators call her Reaper. She has survived 47 firefights. She has earned every rank she holds through blood and competence. Martinez leaned forward. And you, Corporal, had the staggering stupidity to put your hands on her in a bar because you were drunk and thought she was weak. Hollis's face had gone pale. His jaw trembled. Commander Ashford could end you with a single recommendation. Martinez continued. One word from her and you'd be in front of a court-martial board so fast your head would spin. She has every right to demand maximum punishment, every justification for making an example of you. Martinez paused, watching Hollis process the enormity of his situation. Instead, she made a recommendation that surprised me. She suggested Article 15 non-judicial punishment combined with a comprehensive correction program. She wants to rehabilitate you, Corporal. She wants to educate you. She wants to send you back to this battalion as a better Marine. Hollis's eyes widened, confusion mixed with terror. Why? He managed to ask. Gunnery Sergeant Thompson stepped forward. At 54 years old, Thompson had served in Desert Storm, Somalia, Iraq, and Afghanistan. He had a Purple Heart and enough combat decorations to cover half his chest. When he spoke, his voice carried the gravitas of someone who'd seen the worst of war and the best of warriors. Because she's a better Marine than you, Devil Dog. Because she understands something you haven't learned yet. Leadership isn't about destroying people who fail. It's about building people who can succeed. Now you're about to learn why SEALs earn the Trident. Martinez delivered the Article 15 punishment 30 minutes later after Hollis consulted with his legal counsel and accepted non-judicial punishment rather than demanding court-martial. The decision was obvious. Court-martial meant career destruction. NJP meant a chance. The punishment was severe but survivable. Reduction in rank from corporal to lance corporal, forfeiture of half a month's pay for 2 months, 45 days of extra duty, 45 days of restriction to base, and 14 days of intensive training designed personally by Commander Kira Ashford. You will report to the training area at Camp Pendleton tomorrow at 0500 hours, Martinez said. You will complete every evolution. You will learn every lesson. You will not quit. You will not complain. You will not waste Commander Ashford's investment in you. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Dismissed. Hollis saluted and left. As the door closed behind him, Captain Riggs turned to Martinez. Sir, why do you think she's really doing this? Martinez looked at the NCIS report one more time, then set it aside. Because she's trying to change the Marine Corps one Marine at a time. And because she understands that revenge is easy, building something better is hard. That night, Garrett Hollis sat in his barracks room and stared at his phone. He'd been scrolling through his contacts for 20 minutes, his thumb hovering over one name. Caleb, his older brother, the Navy corpsman who'd deployed 3 times, who'd tried to tell Garrett about the female operators he'd worked with, who Garrett had dismissed as going soft. They hadn't spoken in 3 months, not since their last argument about women in combat. Garrett didn't call. He wasn't ready yet. Instead, he pulled up his brother's Facebook page and scrolled through photos. Caleb in Afghanistan, Caleb with his SEAL team, Caleb treating wounded operators in a combat zone. One photo stopped him cold. Caleb standing with a group of SEALs, all of them in combat gear, dust covering their faces. In the center of the group stood a woman smaller than the men around her, but carrying herself with the same confidence. Her left arm was wrapped in bandages. Her eyes were exhausted but focused. The caption read, "After Operation Valkyrie's Edge, Reaper held the line. We're all alive because of her." Garrett stared at the photo for 15 minutes. Then he closed his phone and lay back on his rack. Tomorrow he'd start learning what his brother already knew. Day 1 arrived with fog and cold. Garrett reported to the training area at Camp Pendleton at 0445, 15 minutes early, wearing his PT gear and trying to control the fear that had been building in his chest since yesterday. A Marine captain stood waiting. She was 5'6", maybe 145 pounds, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that suggested she'd seen things Garrett couldn't imagine. Her PT gear was worn but clean. A Silver Star citation was framed on the wall of the small building behind her. Lance Corporal Hollis, I'm Captain Morgan Reeves. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan with Marine Special Operations Command. Commander Ashford asked me to run your physical training for the next 3 days. You will address me as ma'am. You will complete every evolution. You will not quit. Questions? No, ma'am. Outstanding. We start with the obstacle course. Follow me. The obstacle course at Camp Pendleton stretched across 400 meters of dirt rope and wood. Garrett had run it 100 times during his enlistment. His personal best was 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Captain Reeves completed it in 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Garrett watched her move through the course like water flowing downhill. No wasted motion, no hesitation. She scaled the rope climb in 12 seconds, her arms pulling her body up with mechanical efficiency. She cleared the wall jump without breaking stride. She crossed the monkey bars like they were solid ground. When she finished, she wasn't even breathing hard. "Your turn, Lance Corporal. Clock starts now." Garrett ran. He gave it everything he had. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. He attacked the rope climb with aggression and made it to the top in 45 seconds, his arms shaking from effort. He cleared the wall on his second attempt. He fell twice on the monkey bars. 4 minutes and 52 seconds. He stood at the finish line, doubled over, gasping for air. Captain Reeves checked her stopwatch. Again, 2 more runs. Then we moved to combat conditioning. By the end of the evolution, Garrett had vomited twice. His hands were bleeding from rope burn. His arms felt like they'd been filled with concrete. Captain Reeves stood watching him with an expression that suggested mild disappointment. "Lance Corporal, you asked Commander Ashford why women get good men killed. Let me ask you a question. If we were deployed together and our position was overrun, who do you think would be more valuable? You with your aggression and Sid, or me with my technique and efficiency?" Garrett couldn't respond. His lungs were still trying to remember how breathing worked. "Technique beats strength every single time," Reeves continued. "Size beats technique only when technique is equal. Commander Ashford understands that. She learned it at Bud's when she got rolled back twice and had to rebuild her entire approach. She learned it in Afghanistan when she held a position alone for 40 minutes using precision instead of spray and pray." She stepped closer. "You have 13 more days to learn what she already knows. Competence isn't about what's between your legs. It's about what's between your ears. Tomorrow 0500, don't be late." Days 2 and 3 continued the pattern. Ruck marches where Captain Reeves carried a 180-pound dummy 200 meters, while Garrett struggled with a 200-pound dummy and fell behind. Log PT where technique and leverage made Captain Reeves's smaller frame irrelevant. Combat conditioning circuits that left Garrett destroyed while Reeves maintained perfect form through every repetition. On the afternoon of day 3, after the evolution ended, Garrett sat on the ground with his head in his hands. Captain Reeves approached with 2 bottles of water and handed him one. "You're learning," she said. "Slower than I'd like, but you're learning." "Ma'am, I don't understand how you do it." "Do what?" "Make it look easy." Reeves sat down next to him. "It's not easy, Lance Corporal. It's trained. There's a difference. I've spent 10 years building the technique you're watching. 10 years of repetitions and failures and getting back up. Commander Ashford, she's been doing it even longer. She got hypothermia so severe during Bo DS that she forgot her own name. They rolled her back. She came back and did it again. Then she separated her shoulder. They rolled her back again. She came back and finished." She took a drink of water. "That's not strength, Lance Corporal. That's will. And will doesn't care about your gender. It only cares about whether you quit or keep going." That night, Garrett lay in his barracks and thought about his brother Caleb. Thought about the photo of Caleb standing with Commander Ashford after an operation. Thought about the caption, "Reaper held the line." He was starting to understand what that meant. Day 4 shifted from physical training to classroom education. Garrett reported to a conference room at Camp Pendleton at 0800 hours. Inside, he found 30 chairs arranged theater-style facing a screen and podium. He was the only student. A woman in civilian clothes stood at the podium. She was in her late 40s with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen combat. A framed silver star hung on the wall behind her. "Lance Corporal Hollis, I'm Major Rachel Kincaid, retired. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan with female engagement teams. Commander Ashford asked me to provide context for your education. Sit down and pay attention." Major Kincaid's presentation lasted 3 hours. She didn't lecture. She showed photographs of women in combat, female engagement, team members moving through Afghan villages gathering intelligence from women who wouldn't speak to male soldiers, action photos from firefights, women treating wounded Marines, women calling in airstrikes, women doing the hard, violent work of counterinsurgency. After action reports scrolled across the screen. Operations where FET members prevented ambushes, by gathering intelligence male Marines couldn't access. Suicide bombers stopped because a female Marine noticed something wrong and made the call that saved 40 lives, names, dates, casualty figures. "This is Marine Corporal Dakota Meyer," Major Kincaid said, pointing to a photograph of a young woman in combat gear. "She's not a Meyer Medal of Honor recipient, different Meyer. But she prevented a vehicle-borne IED from reaching a checkpoint in Helmand Province by identifying suspicious behavior the male Marines missed. Saved 23 lives. She was 22 years old." Another photo. This is Army Staff Sergeant Jennifer Moreno, killed in action in Afghanistan while clearing a building with Rangers. She was a cultural support team member attached to Special Operations. She died doing the same job as the men she served with, and she did it as well as any of them. The presentation continued. Garrett sat in his chair and absorbed information that contradicted everything he'd believed. Every assumption, every barracks argument, every drunken declaration about how women didn't belong. The evidence was overwhelming. When Major Kincaid finished, she stood at the podium and looked directly at Garrett. "Lance Corporal, you assaulted Commander Ashford because you assumed she was weak. You assumed she didn't belong. You assumed that her presence endangered men. Every assumption you made was wrong. And the worst part, your assumptions insulted everyone in these photographs. Women who bled, women who died, women who proved their worth in the hardest way possible." When she paused, "You have 10 more days to prove you can unlearn those assumptions. Use them wisely." Day 5 brought Garrett to the rifle range. He'd qualified expert with his M4 3 times. He considered himself a good shot, better than average. Staff Sergeant Dana Garrett stood waiting at the 1,000-inch range. She was 29 years old with a distinguished rifleman badge on her chest and eyes that suggested she didn't suffer fools. "Lance Corporal, we're going to compete. 600 meters, 10 rounds, best score wins. I win, you do extra PT tonight. You win, you get the afternoon off." Garrett nodded. 600 meters was distance shooting, wind reading, elevation adjustment. He'd trained for this. Staff Sergeant Garrett went first. She settled into position behind her rifle with the kind of ease that suggested the weapon was an extension of her body. 10 shots, slow, methodical, each round placed with precision. 9 hits center mass, 1 hit just outside center. Garrett's turn. He settled in, controlled his breathing, and fired. 2 hits center mass, 3 hits outer ring, 5 misses. Staff Sergeant Garrett stood up and cleared her weapon. "Lance Corporal, the difference between us isn't strength. It's not aggression. It's not gender. It's discipline. I've fired 50,000 practice rounds in my career. I know my weapon. I know wind. I know holdover and bullet drop and every variable that affects precision shooting. You know how to pull a trigger and hope." She ejected her magazine and set her rifle down. Commander Ashford qualified expert her first time at Buds, not because she's naturally gifted, because she shot 10,000 practice rounds before qualification. Excellence isn't natural, Lance Corporal. It's built, one repetition at a time. That afternoon, Garrett did extra PT, 200 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, 3-mile run in full gear. He didn't complain. He was starting to understand that the punishment wasn't the point. The lesson was. Day 6 brought a visitor Garrett hadn't expected. He reported to a small classroom at 0800 and found an older man waiting. 70 years old maybe, with gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore civilian clothes, but something about the way he carried himself suggested military background. "Lance Corporal Hollis, sit down. I'm Gunnery Sergeant William Draven, retired. People call me Bull. Commander Ashford asked me to talk to you, so I'm going to talk and you're going to listen." Garrett sat. Bull stood at the front of the classroom with his arms crossed. "Kid, I served with SEALs during the Cold War. Grenada, Panama, places I still can't discuss because they're classified 4 decades later. I jumped into combat with Lieutenant James Ashford in 1983 when we invaded Grenada. Medical school rescue. You ever heard of it? No, sir. Of course you haven't. Nobody remembers Grenada except the people who were there. But I'm going to tell you about it because it's relevant to why you're sitting in this room." Bull pulled up a chair and sat down. The movement was deliberate, like everything about him suggested purpose. "October 1983, SEAL Team 4 gets ordered to jump into Point Celine's airport in Grenada. Mission is secure the airfield and rescue American medical students being held hostage. Intelligence says minimal resistance. Maybe some Cuban advisors? Light weapons? Easy op. Bull's eyes hardened. Intelligence was wrong. When we hit the ground, we found Cuban military engineers, heavily armed, dug in positions, and they fought like demons. My team took fire immediately. We were pinned down, couldn't advance, couldn't retreat. I made a catastrophic assumption that nearly got everyone killed. What assumption, sir? That engineers weren't fighters. That because they weren't infantry, they'd fold under pressure. I underestimated them based on their job description. Same way you underestimated Commander Ashford based on her gender. Bull leaned forward. Lieutenant Ashford, the kid leading our element, saw my mistake faster than I did. He adjusted our tactics, used Cuban positions against them, got us out alive. After the operation, he pulled me aside and said something I've never forgotten. He said, "Bull assumptions kill, judge threats by capability, not appearance." Garrett listened, processing. 45 years later, Bull continued. I trained Lieutenant Ashford's daughter, Kira, Commander Ashford to you. I pushed her harder than any male candidate at Buds. No, why what bust on them? No, sir. Because I remembered those Cuban engineers in Grenada. I remembered what happened when I underestimated based on assumptions. I trained Kira Ashford to be better than assumptions, better than expectations, better than the limitations people tried to put on her. Bull stood up. She rolled back twice. Hypothermia almost killed her during dive phase. Then she separated her shoulder and had to do land warfare all over again. 18 months of training total. Most people would have quit. She didn't. She came back every single time because she understood something you haven't learned yet. What's that, sir? That competence is earned, not given. That standards don't care about your gender or your feelings or your assumptions. They only care about whether you meet them. Kira Ashford met every single standard the Navy threw at her, and then she deployed to Afghanistan and saved 9 American lives. Bull walked to the door, then turned back. One of those lives was your brother, HM2 Caleb Hollis, Navy corpsman. He was on Commander Ashford's team in Helmand Province when they extracted that downed pilot. She held a position alone for 40 minutes. 23 enemy kills. The enemies. Your brother says she's the best warrior he's ever worked with, and you had the ignorance to assault her in a bar. Garrett's world tilted. My brother was there. Talk to him. Ask him about Operation Valkyrie's Edge. Ask him about what Commander Ashford did. Then ask yourself why you dishonored his service by dismissing the person who saved his life. Bull opened the door. You've got 8 days left, kid. Don't waste them. And don't waste what Commander Ashford is trying to teach you. She's giving you something most people never get. A second chance. A real one. Earn it. The door closed. Garrett sat alone at the classroom for 20 minutes. Then he pulled out his phone and called his brother for the first time in 3 months. Caleb answered on the second ring. Garrett, what's going on? I need to know about Afghanistan, about Commander Ashford, about Operation Valkyrie's Edge. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. What happened, little brother? I screwed up, Caleb. I screwed up bad. And now I need to understand what I did. Days 7 and 8 brought Garrett to Coronado for one-on-one sessions with Commander Ashford. He rode in a military vehicle with Gunnery Sergeant Thompson, who didn't speak during the entire 90-minute drive. When they arrived at the Naval Special Warfare compound, Thompson walked him to a small conference room and told him to wait. Garrett sat at a table in his dress uniform, hands folded, trying to control the fear that had been building since Bull Draven's lesson. He'd spoken to his brother Caleb for 2 hours the night before, heard the story of Operation Valkyrie's Edge from someone who had been there, heard about Commander Ashford holding a position while bullets tore apart the wall she was hiding behind, heard about the precision of her shooting and the calmness of her voice over the radio while she called out targets and managed her ammunition. Heard about the moment when shrapnel hit her arm and she kept fighting without pause. She saved us, Garrett, Caleb had said. All of us. Not because she's superhuman, because she's that good, that disciplined, that committed. And you put your hands on her in a bar. You disrespected her. You disrespected me. You disrespected everyone who's ever worn the trident. The door opened. Commander Ashford entered wearing her working uniform, the Navy Type 3 camouflage, with her rank insignia and warfare pin. The trident gleamed on her chest. She carried a folder and a bottle of water. She sat down across from Garrett and set the folder on the table between them. Lance Corporal Hollis, how has your training been so far? Difficult, ma'am, but educational. Good. Difficult is the point. Education is the goal. She opened the folder. Inside were documents Garrett recognized from his service record, medical reports, training evaluations, deployment records from Okinawa. Tell me why you joined the Marines, she said. Garrett answered honestly. To serve, ma'am, to be part of something bigger than myself, to make my family proud. Your brother Caleb joined the Navy for the same reasons. He's deployed 3 times, saved lives, earned the respect of every SEAL he's worked with. Did you know he was on my team in Afghanistan? I didn't know until yesterday, ma'am. Kira pulled out a photograph from the folder. The same photo Garrett had seen on his brother's Facebook page. Caleb standing with the SEAL team after Operation Valkyrie's Edge. Commander Ashford in the center with her arm bandaged. Your brother ran through enemy fire to reach me when I took shrapnel. While I was engaging targets, while rounds were hitting all around my position, your brother moved across open ground to treat my wound. He saved my life, Lance Corporal. Not because I'm a commander, not because I'm a woman, because I'm a teammate, and teammates don't leave each other behind. She set the photo down. Now tell me why you assaulted me in that bar. Garrett struggled to find words. Ma'am, I was drunk. I made assumptions. I believed things about women in combat that were wrong. You thought I was weak. You thought I didn't belong. You thought my presence endangered men. Kira's voice remained calm, but something underneath it suggested she had heard all this before. Those assumptions exist throughout the military, Lance Corporal, in barracks conversations, in online forums, in the minds of people who've never deployed, never seen combat, never worked alongside the women who've proven those assumptions wrong. She pulled out more documents. Medical reports from Bud E.S., a report detailing her hypothermia, body temperature 93.8 degrees, 4 days in the hospital. Another report about her shoulder separation, surgery, 6 months of recovery. I earned the trident through 2 rollbacks and 18 months of training. I nearly died from hypothermia. I tore my shoulder apart. I kept coming back because quitting wasn't an option. Not for me, because if I quit, every woman after me would carry that failure. She pulled out her Bronze Star citation and read it aloud, the official language describing the 40-minute firefight. The enemy kills, the lives saved, the shrapnel wounds sustained while continuing to engage targets. Your brother was there, Lance Corporal. He saw what happened. He knows the truth, and you dismissed everything he tried to tell you because it didn't fit your assumptions. Garrett's hands were shaking. Ma'am, I was wrong about everything. I dishonored my brother's service. I insulted you. I made the Marine Corps look bad. I understand that now. Understanding is the first step. The question is what you do with that understanding. I could have ended your career, court-martial, discharge, made you an example, but that doesn't change culture. It just punishes one person and leaves the system unchanged. Kira leaned forward. I'm investing 2 weeks in you because I believe people can change, because I believe education is more powerful than punishment, because your brother saved my life, and this is how I honor that debt, by making you better, by teaching you what he already knows, that competence transcends gender, that standards are what matter, that assumptions kill. She stood up. You have 6 more days. Let them to become the Marine your brother deserves to have as family. Dismissed. Garrett stood, saluted, and left. As he walked back to the vehicle where Gunnery Sergeant Thompson waited, he felt something shift inside him. Not forgiveness. He hadn't earned that yet. But purpose. He had 6 days to prove he could learn. 6 days to honor his brother's service. 6 days to become better than the person who'd walked into that bar a week ago. He wouldn't waste them. Days 9 through 13 blurred together in a relentless cycle that forced Garrett Hollis to confront every assumption he had built his worldview around. Captain Morgan Reeves pushed him through evolutions that left him gasping. Staff Sergeant Dana Garrett made him shoot until his shoulder ached. Major Rachel Kincaid showed him evidence that women in combat weren't liability, but force multiplier. And twice more Garrett sat across from Commander Ashford and listened to her explain what it meant to carry the weight of proving yourself every single day. On day 12, during their second session, Garrett asked the question that had been building since Buldraven's lesson. Ma'am, how do you deal with people who will never accept you, who will always see your gender before your competence? Commander Ashford was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried weariness that came from years of fighting battles most people never saw. I don't need their acceptance, Lance Corporal. I need to be so undeniably competent they can't ignore reality. Some people will never accept me. That's their limitation, not mine. My job is to be so good at what I do that their opinions become irrelevant. She looked at him directly. But some days it's hard. Some days I wonder if my father was right. If the cost is too high, some days I wanted to quit. Why don't you, ma'am? Because the people who came before me didn't quit when things got hard. My teammates don't quit when bullets start flying. So I don't quit. That's the standard. Not giving up when it would be easier to walk away. On day 13, Gunnery Sergeant Thompson told Garrett about his daughter who'd quit the Marines after harassment broke her spirit. What Commander Ashford is doing for you, that's the culture change my daughter needed. Someone willing to invest in making people better instead of just destroying them. You're getting a gift, Hollis. Don't waste it. Day 14 arrived with clear skies and the weight of expectation. Garrett stood outside the battalion auditorium at 0700 hours holding the speech he'd delivered to 200 Marines. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez found him in the hallway. Hollis, you ready? Garrett took a breath. I'm ready, sir. Good. Commander Ashford is here. She's sitting in the back. She didn't tell you because she wanted to see what you'd say when you thought she wasn't watching. Don't disappoint her. The auditorium was full, 200 Marines and utilities, battalion leadership in the front row, and in the very back, Commander Kira Ashford sat with Buldraven beside her. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez introduced him. Garrett walked to the podium, gripped the edges, and began. Good morning. 2 weeks ago, I assaulted Commander Kira Ashford in a bar 3 blocks from this base. I put my hands on a superior officer. I used language designed to demean and insult. I brought disgrace to this battalion and the Marine Corps. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to explain what I've learned and why every Marine in this auditorium needs to hear it. He advanced through slides, Women's Army Corps in World War II, female engagement teams in Afghanistan, the 2013 policy change, performance data showing integrated units performing at the same level as all-male units. Then he showed Commander Ashford's photograph from Helmand, dust-covered, left arm bandaged, eyes exhausted but focused. This is Commander Kira Ashford, the woman I assaulted. She earned her SEAL Trident after 18 months of training. Rolled back twice. Hypothermia. Shoulder separation. She came back both times. She deployed to Afghanistan in 2018. Next slide. The after-action report. Operation Valkyrie's Edge, Helmand Province. Mission extract a downed pilot from a Taliban compound. Commander Ashford held an exterior position alone for 40 minutes during exfiltration. 23 confirmed enemy kills. She took shrapnel and continued fighting. She saved 9 American lives. Garrett's voice caught. One of those lives was my brother, HM2 Caleb Hollis, Navy corpsman. He was on Commander Ashford's team. He treated her wound while she was still engaging targets. He told me she's the best warrior he's ever worked with, and I had the ignorance to dismiss her because of her gender. Silence. For 2 weeks, I've been trained by women who've deployed to combat zones. I watched Captain Reeves outperform me on every evolution. I watched Staff Sergeant Garrett outshoot me by embarrassing margins. I learned about female engagement teams that prevented suicide bombings and saved American lives. Final slide, the SEAL Trident. I learned what the Trident means. It's not just a pin, it's a standard. Excellence without compromise. The standard doesn't care about your gender. It only cares about whether you meet it. Commander Ashford met it. She exceeded it, and I dishonored it. He stepped from behind the podium. I don't know if I deserve this second chance, but I'm grateful. And I'll spend the rest of my time in the Marine Corps proving that women like Commander Ashford belong anywhere they earn the right to be. Because they've already earned it. We just need to open our eyes. He returned to the podium. That concludes my presentation. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez stood. Formation dismissed. 200 Marines filed out. Some looked thoughtful, others skeptical, a few angry, but they all looked. Garrett remained at attention until the auditorium emptied. Then Commander Ashford and Bull Draven walked toward him. He snapped to attention. Commander Ashford extended her hand. Well done, Lance Corporal. Your brother would be proud. The handshake felt monumental, like crossing a threshold he couldn't uncross. Ma'am, thank you for everything. You did the work, Hollis. I just provided the framework. Now the real test begins. Culture change doesn't happen in presentations. It happens in daily choices. How you respond when someone makes a sexist joke in the barracks. How you treat female Marines in your unit. That's where you prove whether this was real or just words. Bull Draven handed him something. A compass. Old brass, weathered but functional. Replica of the compass I carried in Grenada. The original goes to Commander Ashford because she earned it. But you get this as a reminder. Judge capability, not appearance. Don't forget. Garrett held the compass like it was sacred. I won't, sir. I promise. After they left, Garrett pulled out his phone. A text from Caleb sent 20 minutes earlier. Gunny Thompson called me. Told me what you said. I'm proud of you, little brother. Let's talk tonight. Garrett sat in the front row and cried for the first time since he was a child. Commander Kira Ashford drove back to Coronado with Bull Draven in the passenger seat. They didn't speak for 30 minutes. Just drove through Southern California traffic while morning fog burned off. Finally, Bull broke the silence. You did good, kid. That Marine learned something real. Whether he holds on to it is up to him, but you gave him the tools. I hope this wasn't just 2 weeks that changes nothing. It won't change everything, but it might change him, and he'll change someone else. That's how culture shifts, one person at a time. Bull looked out at the Pacific. Your dad called me last week. First time since his stroke. Kira's hands tightened on the wheel. What did he say? Asked about you, the bar incident, the training program. I told him everything, told him you chose rehabilitation over revenge. You know what he said? I can't imagine. He said, Bull, I was wrong about her, about integration, about everything. Tell her I'm ready to talk when she is. Kira took the exit toward Coronado, focused on the road. I've spent 10 years proving him wrong. 10 years earning ranks and deployments and respect. And now he's ready to talk. Now that I've done everything he said was impossible. He's been ready for years, kid. He just couldn't admit it. The stroke forced him to confront mortality, made him realize he's running out of time to fix things. Your mom made him promise something before she died. You know what it was? No. She made him promise not to limit you, to believe in you, to be the one person who didn't tell you what you couldn't do. He failed that promise. He knows it, and he's trying to make it right before it's too late. Bull reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph. Elizabeth Ashford in her Navy uniform from 30 years ago, young and strong and alive. She gave me this before she died, told me to give it to you when you earned your trident. I was supposed to tell you she always knew you'd do great things, that she believed in you even when your father couldn't. Kira pulled over, took the photograph with shaking hands. Why didn't you give this to me at graduation? Because you weren't ready. You were still angry, still trying to prove something. But now, after what you did for that Marine, now you're ready to understand what your mom knew. That proving people wrong isn't the point. Building something better is. Kira stared at her mother's smile. The uniform. The life cut short. I'll call him, tonight. Good. And kid, bring that compass I gave you at graduation. The real one from Grenada. You're going to need it for what comes next. That evening, Kira sat in her quarters with her phone in her hand and her mother's photograph on the desk. The Grenada compass sat next to it, Bull's gift from 9 years ago. She'd been staring at her father's contact for 20 minutes. Finally, she typed a message. Bull told me you called him. He told me what you said. I've spent the last 2 weeks teaching a Marine who assaulted me why his assumptions were wrong and what it means to earn the trident. I'd like your perspective on whether I handled it correctly, if you're willing to talk. She hit send. 90 seconds later, her phone rang. Admiral James Ashford retired, Kira answered. Hi, Dad. Her father's voice was older, slower. The stroke had affected his speech, adding hesitation that hadn't been there before. Kira, thank you for calling. Bull said you wanted to talk. I do. I've wanted to talk for months, years really. I just didn't know how to start. Didn't know if you'd want to hear from me after everything I said, everything I believed. They talked about safe things first, his health, retirement, weather, small talk that danced around everything important while they gathered courage. Finally, her father broke through. Bull told me what happened. The bar, the Marine, the training program. He said you chose rehabilitation over punishment, that you invested 2 weeks educating someone who wronged you instead of destroying him. That's correct. I wouldn't have done that. I would have demanded court-martial, maximum punishment, made an example that echoed through every command in the Corps. Kira waited for the qualification. Instead, her father said something she'd never heard before. That's why your decision was superior to what I would have done. You understood something I've spent my entire career missing. That revenge accomplishes nothing. That punishment without education just creates resentment. That real leadership is about building people up, not tearing them down. Kira couldn't speak. I was wrong, Kira, about integration, about women in special operations, about you. Not about every tactical concern. Physical standards still matter. Unit cohesion still matters. But the fundamental premise that women couldn't perform at SEAL level bomb, that their presence would endanger men, that social engineering would destroy the teams, I was wrong about all of it. His voice broke slightly. Watching your career over the past 10 years forced me to confront 40 years of doctrine I'd built. Reading your after-action reports, hearing from operators who served with you, seeing your promotions and decorations, I couldn't reconcile what I believed with what I knew to be true about my daughter. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call after Afghanistan, after the Bronze Star? Because I couldn't admit I was wrong without destroying everything I'd built my career on. The doctrine I'd written, the policies I'd advocated, the testimony I'd given to Congress. If I acknowledged you'd proven me wrong, I'd have to acknowledge that I'd been wrong about thousands of other women who were told they didn't belong. He took a breath. The stroke forced me to face mortality, made me realize I might not have much time left, and I couldn't die without telling you the truth, that you were right, that I was wrong, that I'm proud of you, not just for your courage, for your wisdom, for being a better leader than I ever was. Kira realized she was crying, silent tears while she held the phone to her ear. After your Helmand deployment, I had your team leader's assessment sent to me. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds wrote that you were tactically sound as any SEAL he'd led. That gender was irrelevant, that you were simply a warrior who'd earned the trident and performed at the highest level. I kept that report on my desk for years. Every time someone asked my opinion on integration, I looked at it and knew I was lying to them and to myself. Dad, let me finish, please. Your mother made me promise before she died. Elizabeth made me promise not to limit you, not to tell you what you couldn't do, to be the one person who believed you could do anything. I failed that promise. I let my career and my pride and my fear of being wrong dictate how I treated your success. That was cowardice. I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air, words that couldn't be unsaid, a bridge being built across years of silence. I forgive you, Kira said. I forgive you, Dad. They talked for another 40 minutes, about Bull's role, about the compass and what it meant, about the training program and whether the approach could scale, about the future of integration and what lessons remained. Finally, her father asked the question that mattered most. Will you come visit next weekend? I'll cook. Bull's coming too. He wants to hear about the Marine you trained. And I want to see you, Kira. I want to talk in person. I want to try to rebuild what I broke. Kira looked at her mother's photograph, the compass, the Bronze Star in its case. I'll be there, Dad, Saturday morning. Thank you. And Kira, bring your trident, the one they pinned on you at graduation. I want to see it. I should have seen it 9 years ago, but I was too stubborn and scared. I want to see it now. After they hung up, Kira sat in her quarters for an hour, not moving, just processing, feeling the weight of 10 years lift 1 pound at a time. Her phone buzzed, a text from Bull. Talk to your dad. He told me you're coming to Virginia. Good. We've got something special planned. 3 generations of Trident holders. It's time. 3 generations. Bull, her father, herself. The legacy she'd been running from was about to become the foundation for everything that came next. On a Saturday morning in June, Kira drove to Virginia. 12 hours with stops, arriving at the house overlooking Chesapeake Bay as the sun set. Her father stood on the porch, thinner but stronger than she'd feared. Bull Draven was already there, sitting in a rocking chair with a beer and a smile on his weathered face. 3 generations of warriors, connected by the trident and the standard it represented. They spent the weekend talking about integration and what had been learned, about mistakes and progress, about the future. On Sunday afternoon, her father and Bull led her to the study, the room where her father had worked for 40 years, where he'd written the doctrine that shaped naval special warfare, where the shadow box containing his trident had hung for as long as Kira could remember. But now there were 2 shadow boxes on the desk, her father's and Bull's. Both men stood beside them. The afternoon light filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Outside, the bay stretched toward the horizon, the same water that had witnessed 100 years of naval tradition. Inside this room, 3 generations prepared to acknowledge something that had taken decades to build and years to repair. Kira, her father said, his voice carrying the weight of everything unsaid for too long. Bull and I talked. We've been talking for weeks, actually. Planning this. We want you to have these, not because you need our validation. You've proven yourself 50 times over, but because you've honored what these tridents represent better than we ever did. Bull stepped forward, his 73 years showing in the silver of his hair, but not in the steadiness of his hands or the clarity of his eyes. My trident is from Grenada and Panama, Cold War operations that stayed classified for decades. Your dad's is from operations I still can't discuss even now. Yours is from Helmand and Syria and Iraq. And from every single day you have led with wisdom instead of just strength. He placed his hand on his shadow box, the gesture reverent. 3 generations, 3 tridents, 3 different wars, 3 different centuries if you think about it. But the same standard, that's what matters. The standard never changed. What changed was our understanding of who could meet it. Kira's father picked up his shadow box. The trident inside gleamed against dark velvet, medals from operations that remained classified. A photograph of young James Ashford in Grenada, barely older than Kira had been when she'd earned her own trident. Your mother made me promise to believe in you, he said. I failed that promise for too long. But I'm keeping it now. This is me acknowledging that we're equals, that you met the standard we set, that you exceeded it. He paused, looking at the trident he'd earned 45 years ago. When I earned this, I thought I knew what it meant. Combat effectiveness, physical capability, brotherhood forged under impossible conditions. And I was right about all of that, but I was wrong about who could embody those things. I built a career on that wrongness. I wrote doctrine that excluded people who could have served with honor. I gave testimony that limited opportunity based on assumptions rather than evidence. His voice grew stronger, more certain. You proved me wrong, Kira, not by lowering the standard, not by asking for special consideration, but by meeting every single requirement we threw at you and then going into combat and performing at the highest level. You proved that the standard wasn't wrong. My understanding of who could meet it was wrong. Bull handed Kira his shadow box first. She took it with trembling hands. Inside, his trident rested next to a silver star, a bronze star, and medals from operations in Central America. A faded photograph showed young Bull and young James in Grenada, covered in mud and combat gear, grinning despite the hell they'd just survived. That compass I gave you at your graduation, Bull said quietly. It was in my pocket during the worst firefight of my life, when we hit the ground in Grenada and realized intelligence had gotten everything wrong. When Cuban forces nearly pushed us into the sea, your dad saved my life that day, pulled me out of a position that was about to get overrun. That compass was part of that survival. He looked at Kira directly. I gave it to you because I knew you'd need it the same way we did. Not to navigate terrain, but to navigate a career where the terrain was hostile in ways we never faced, where you had to fight the enemy and fight your own institution at the same time. You did it, kid. You navigated through all of it and came out the other side with the standard intact and the door open for everyone who comes after. Kira's father handed her his shadow box, heavier than Bull's. More medals, more history, the weight of a career spent building something that had tried to exclude his own daughter. This is me acknowledging what your mother knew from the beginning, he said, that you were always going to be extraordinary, that the only question was whether I'd be smart enough to see it. It took me too long, cost us years we can't get back, but I see it now. He placed both hands on Kira's shoulders. You've made the teams better. You've made naval special warfare better. You've made me better. And I'm proud of you, Kira, not just as a father, as a fellow warrior who recognizes genuine excellence when he finally opens his eyes enough to see it. Kira held both shadow boxes, feeling the weight of 3 generations in her hands. 3 tridents, 3 wars, 3 lifetimes of service compressed into this moment. I don't know what to say, she managed. Don't say anything yet, Bull said. There's one more part. Her father opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a 3rd shadow box. New, empty except for mounting brackets. This one's for you to fill, he said. Your trident, your decorations, your story. We want you to put it here in this study next to ours. 3 generations, one unbroken line of warriors who earned the right to wear that pin. He gestured to the wall where his shadow box had hung for decades. When you make flag officer, and you will, this wall will tell the story. Bull's Grenada trident, my Cold War trident, your integration era trident, and someday years from now, the trident of whatever operator you mentor who goes further than any of us imagined possible. Kira set the 2 shadow boxes down carefully on the desk. She pulled her trident from her pocket, the same pin that had been pressed into her uniform 9 years ago while her father stayed home in Virginia. The pin she'd earned through hypothermia and shoulder separation and sheer refusal to quit. She placed it in the empty shadow box. The 3 tridents sat together on the desk. Grenada, Cold War operations, Helmand Province. 3 different wars, same standard. Bull raised his beer. To the trident, may those who wear it always honor it. Admiral Ashford raised his glass of whiskey. To the next generation. May they build on what we started and fix what we got wrong. Kira raised her water bottle, her voice breaking. To the standard that never changes and the understanding that finally did. 3 glasses met, 3 generations united. They stood together on the porch as the sun set over Chesapeake Bay, watching the light fade over water that had witnessed a century of naval tradition. The air smelled of salt and cut grass. Somewhere across the bay, a ship's horn sounded low and mournful. Your mom would have loved this moment, her father said quietly. She always believed you'd change things. She saw the future while I was stuck defending the past. Bull took a long drink of his beer. Elizabeth was the smartest one of all of us. She knew Kira would be extraordinary before Kira was old enough to walk. She told me once, must have been right before she died, that Kira was going to make us all look like we'd been arguing about whether the sky was blue. He chuckled, the sound rough with emotion. She was right. We spent 40 years building doctrine around the wrong question. We asked, can women perform at this level? When we should have been asking, how do we ensure everyone who can perform at this level gets the opportunity to try? Kira's father nodded. The stroke gave me clarity I should have had decades ago. When you're lying in a hospital bed wondering if you'll ever walk again, you start questioning everything you thought was important. And I realized I'd spent my entire career being wrong about the thing that mattered most. He looked at Kira. You didn't just prove women could be SEALs. You proved that excellence transcends every assumption we make about who belongs. That the standard is what matters, not our prejudices about who can meet it. That's the lesson. That's what I should have understood from the beginning. They stood in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Lights came on across the bay. A breeze carried the smell of honeysuckle and cut grass. Finally, Bull spoke. 3 generations carried the trident. 4th generation is already training somewhere. 5th generation is probably in high school right now dreaming about it. They'll have it easier because you made it possible, kid. That's legacy. 6 months later, Lance Corporal Garrett Hollis received his acceptance to Officer Candidate School. His package included letters from Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, Captain Morgan Reeves, and Commander Kira Ashford. On the day his acceptance arrived, a second letter came from Virginia. Lance Corporal Hollis Gunnery Sergeant Draven informs me you've been accepted to OCS. Congratulations. Leadership is earned through making people better. When you commission, call me. I'll mentor you the way Bull Draven mentored my daughter. 3 generations of warriors passing knowledge forward. You're part of that chain now. Admiral James Ashford, U.S. and retired. Garrett framed the letter and hung it in his barracks room. Captain Kira Ashford received promotion orders to 06 and a new assignment, Commanding Officer Naval Special Warfare Basic Training Command. She would oversee BUDDIS directly, shape the training that produced the next generation, mentor the first female candidates entering the pipeline. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but for the first time in her career, it didn't feel like burden. It felt like purpose. 1 year after the bar incident, Captain Kira Ashford stood in the Buds compound at Coronado watching Class 358 graduate. Among the 43 candidates earning their tridents was Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, the first female graduate under Kira's command. The ceremony was standard. No special attention, no media, just another class earning the pin the hard way. When Kira pinned the trident on Lieutenant Mitchell's uniform, she leaned close and whispered the words Bull Draven had whispered to her 9 years before. You earned this, now honor it. The standard doesn't change. Who meets it just expanded by one more. Lieutenant Mitchell's eyes were bright with emotion. Thank you, ma'am. I won't let you down. You won't let yourself down. That's all that matters. After the ceremony, as families and friends celebrated, Kira walked to the beach behind the compound. The same beach where she'd nearly died from hypothermia during Hell Week. The same beach where she'd learned that pain was weather and quitting was permanent. Her phone buzzed, a text from Bull. Heard Mitchell graduated. Your dad wants to meet her. Says he's got some stories to tell about what real leadership looks like. He's talking about you, kid. Come to Virginia next month. Bring Mitchell if she's willing. Let's make this official. Kira smiled and typed back. We'll be there. She stood on the beach watching the sunset over the Pacific. The same ocean that had tested her. The same ocean that would test Lieutenant Mitchell and everyone who came after. The same ocean that had tested her father and Bull decades before. The standard remained uncompromised. The door remained open. And 3 generations of warriors had proven that excellence transcended every assumption about who belonged and who didn't. At the Navy SEAL Museum in Fort Pierce, Florida, a new exhibit opened in the spring titled Evolution and Excellence Integration in Naval Special Warfare. The exhibit featured uniforms photographs and after-action reports from the first women to earn the trident. Captain Kira Ashford's dress uniform was displayed prominently alongside her Bronze Star citation. During the opening ceremony, 3 people stood together in front of the exhibit. Admiral James Ashford in his dress whites, 74 years old, walking with a cane from the stroke, but sharp as ever. Gunnery Sergeant Bull Draven in a suit, 75, and still imposing despite his age. Captain Kira Ashford in her dress blues with the trident gleaming on her chest and Captain's Eagles on her collar. 3 generations, 3 tridents. One legacy that had evolved from exclusion to inclusion without compromising the standard that made the teams elite. A museum official approached the microphone to begin the formal remarks, but Bull held up his hand. If you don't mind, I'd like to say something first. The official stepped aside. Bull stood before the small crowd of operators, historians, and museum staff. He didn't use notes. 42 years ago, I jumped into Grenada with SEAL Team 4 alongside Lieutenant James Ashford. We thought we knew everything about what made warriors effective. We'd been tested in combat. We'd earned our tridents. We'd proven ourselves under the worst conditions imaginable. He paused. And we were wrong about something fundamental. We confused familiarity with capability. We assumed that because warriors had always looked a certain way, they had to look that way. We built doctrine around that assumption. Some of us spent entire careers defending it. He gestured to Admiral Ashford. Jim spent 40 years building naval special warfare into the most effective direct action force on the planet. He did it based on principles that were mostly right and one principle that was completely wrong. He had the courage to admit that, to change, to acknowledge that his daughter proved something he'd spent a career denying. Bull turned to Kira. This woman earned her trident through 2 rollbacks in 18 months of training. She deployed to Helmand and held a position alone for 40 minutes. 23 confirmed kills, saved 9 American lives. She's commanded with wisdom and led with integrity. She's made naval special warfare better by proving that the standard is what matters, not our assumptions about who can meet it. He looked back at the crowd. 3 generations of trident holders are standing here today. We earned ours in different wars under different circumstances, facing different challenges. But we earned them to the same standard. That's what matters. The standard never changed. Our understanding of who could meet it finally did. Bull raised his beer. The 4th generation is already training. The 5th is already dreaming. They'll go further than we ever imagined because warriors like Captain Ashford opened the door and held the standard high. That's legacy. That's what the trident means. The crowd raised their glasses. Admiral Ashford stepped forward and put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. Bull stood on her other side. 3 generations, 3 tridents, 1 unbroken line. The exhibit would stay open for years. Tens of thousands would walk through and see Captain Ashford's uniform, read her after-action reports, and learn about the operations that proved women could perform at the highest level. But for the 3 warriors standing together that afternoon, the exhibit was just documentation of something they already knew. Excellence transcends assumptions. The standard remains uncompromised. And legacy is built by those brave enough to question what they thought they knew and wise enough to change when the evidence demands it. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, Kira, her father, and Bull walked out to the observation deck overlooking the Atlantic. The same ocean where all 3 had trained, the same ocean that would test the next generation. Bull took a long drink of his beer and smiled. 4th generation's already out there somewhere, kid. Training, preparing. They're going to make us all look slow and old. Admiral Ashford chuckled. They already do. I watched Bud's training last month when I visited Coronado. The kids today are faster, stronger, smarter than we ever were. That's how it should be, Kira said. Each generation builds on what came before. We didn't lower the standard. We expanded understanding of who could meet it, and they'll expand it further. That's how excellence works. It evolves. Bull nodded. Your mom knew that. Elizabeth saw the future while we were busy defending the past. She'd be proud of all this. Admiral Ashford's voice was quiet. She'd be proud of Kira. I'm just glad I lived long enough to see it clearly. They stood together as the sun set over the Atlantic, 3 generations united by the trident and the standard it represented. Behind them, the museum held the evidence of what they'd built and proven. Ahead of them, the ocean stretched toward horizons where the next generation trained. The legacy was unbroken. The standard remained high. And the door was open for everyone willing to earn their way through it. Bull raised his beer one final time. To those who earned it, to those who will earn it, and to the standard that makes it worth earning. 3 glasses met, 3 generations, 1 trident, unbroken.